Solomon is another unlikely saint. He also began as an unlikely king. As one of the youngest sons of David, nobody expected him to be the next king of Israel. But God chose him, and David listened to God. When Solomon's oldest surviving brother Adonijah declared himself king, all the other sons of David went out to celebrate with him, feasting and shouting, "Long live King Adonijah!" But David, together with Nathan and Bathsheba, stopped the attempted coup by placing Solomon on the throne that very day. Nobody seemed to expect much from Solomon. He was a bookworm, not a warrior. David continually called him young and inexperienced. He implied in his deathbed speech that he didn't think Solomon had the grit or the skill to run a kingdom. So what did Solomon do?
He asked for help for wisdom.
He asked for help. He asked for wisdom. He ran to God. He went on pilgrimage to Gibeon, offered up an enormous number of burnt sacrifices, and prayed for help. Perhaps in the words of his fathers, "O God, come to my assistance. Lord, make haste to help me. I will not let you go unless you bless me." And God came to him in a dream and said, "Ask me for what I shall give you." Solomon asked for wisdom, and boy, did he get it. If you've got a Bible in front of you, turn for a moment to Song of Songs, chapter 3. We're talking about the soul-seeking God. "Upon my bed by night I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I called him, but he gave no answer. I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. The watchmen found me as they went about in the city. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed them, when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him, and would not let him go until I had brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her that conceived me." Sometimes we need to pray like that. Seek God persistently. Pray persistently. Don't let go. Pray until something happens. Pray until God shows up. Declare a fast. "I will not watch TV until you bless me." Now, we know we can't strong-arm God with our prayers. "All right, God, I'm going on a hunger strike until you do this for me." It doesn't work like that. He's God. But he invites us to pray passionately. He invites us to nag him like the widow nagging the unjust judge. God says through the prophet Jeremiah, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." Sometimes when God refuses to be found by us easily, it's an invitation for us to go deeper, to spend a little more time with the Bible wide open on our lap, or to declare some kind of fast, to call a novena, to do something a little special. See what God does in response. Solomon sought God and found him. God gave him wisdom and everything he didn't ask for: wealth, power, long life. Solomon became Israel's most glorious king, and Israel had peace, prosperity, and empire all the days of his life. So Solomon gave glory back to God. Solomon built the temple. It's hard for us to appreciate just how central the temple was to the religious life of the Jewish people. The temple reminded the people of all the covenants that God had made with his people, and even in some sense contained those covenants. The temple was decorated to resemble a Garden of Eden, with engravings of palm trees and animals, and there was a river flowing out of its side named the Gihon, after one of the rivers that flowed from Eden. The temple was built on Mount Moriah, the very spot where Abraham had offered Isaac up as a sacrifice 1,000 years earlier. The temple contained the Ark of the Covenant, the ultimate representation of God's covenant with Moses. And the temple itself was the beginning of the fulfillment of God's covenant with David: "Your son shall build a house for my name." The temple represented God's kept promises. God's relationship with his chosen people going back generations and centuries. And now we've caught up to where we were last time. On the day when Solomon dedicated the temple, the great crowd there saw God's visible presence descend upon it in a cloud of light. It was the same cloud which had guided Moses and the Israelites in the wilderness. The cloud of God's presence, the glory of the Lord. No one could stand to go near. Then Solomon stood at the altar in front of the temple, raised his hands in the air, and prayed a solemn, formal prayer of dedication. He asked God to hear the prayers of his people in this temple. Prayers to be protected against enemies, against famine, against plague, and prayers that their sins might be forgiven. Very, very standard prayers for the protection of the nation. But there are 2 points in the prayer that are a bit unusual. At the very beginning, Solomon gets philosophical, imagine that, and talks about how God doesn't really need a temple to be truly present to his people. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, O Lord. How much less this house which I have built? Yet listen to our prayers which your servants offer toward this place. Solomon is reminding the people that the God of Israel is not like other gods. Other pagan gods, they're localized. They live in idols. They live in temples. They are tied to the soil of a certain land. The God of Israel is, in reality, the God of everyone. The God who made heaven and earth. Solomon wants to make sure everyone realizes that. The other unusual part of the prayer is its treatment of foreigners. When a foreigner comes from a far country for your name's sake, for they shall hear of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm. When he comes and prays toward this house, here in heaven your dwelling place, and do according to all that the foreigner asks, in order that all the peoples of the earth may know your name. Solomon loves foreigners. I have to say that with a smirk. But seriously, Solomon had an evangelistic bent, which was unusual for an Israelite of his time. The law of Moses called for kindness and justice to strangers, but it also set some distance between Israel and the other nations, teaching that Israelites must not marry foreigners or eat at their tables, or most of all, worship their gods, on the side. Otherwise, they will forget the one true God. We're going to see a lot of that in 1st and 2nd Kings. But Solomon loves foreigners. He works together with them to build the temple. He makes alliances and peace treaties with them. He trades with them. He teaches them. He invites them to court. He also marries them, eats at their tables, and worships their gods. We're getting there. Solomon is passionate, though, about teaching the ways of God to his own people, and especially to foreigners. Solomon's most famous foreign disciple was the Queen of Sheba. Sheba was probably all the way down in Yemen or southern Ethiopia. When the Queen of Sheba hears of the fame of Solomon, she comes to test him with hard questions. She comes with camels bearing gold, spices, and precious stones. She's an Old Testament picture of the wise men seeking the infant Christ. And when the queen hears Solomon's wisdom, sees his opulence, sees the peace and prosperity of Israel, and sees his humble worship of God, she is overwhelmed and declares, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel." Solomon let his light shine to people who didn't know him, to bring God to people who didn't know him. We are called to do the same. Tradition has it that the Queen of Sheba went back and established Jewish worship in Ethiopia. There's reason to think this is so. In the book of Acts, as one example, we see an Ethiopian eunuch reading the book of Isaiah as he's traveling on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And even today, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has a distinctly Jewish flavor. They keep kosher, keep the Sabbath, and circumcise their baby boys. I've got to take a brief tangent here. It's too fun. More than any other Old Testament character, Solomon inspired fantastic legends and stories after his death. His story really caught people's imagination. Here's a few of them. Legend has it that Solomon and the Queen of Sheba had a son together, Menelik, whose dynasty ruled Ethiopia for nearly 3,000 years until it was finally conquered by Mussolini. Ethiopians consider Solomon today to be their founding father. Rather more fancifully, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, even today, claims to be protecting the true Ark of the Covenant, which we are not allowed to see. The Arabs loved Solomon just as much as the Ethiopians did. Solomon shows up in the Quran, speaking to the birds and ordering demons to build the temple with the power of his magic ring. Some of these legends are even around in the time of Christ. You can kind of see them coming out. People are already ascribing strange magical powers to Solomon. But no need for taxes and forced labor when you got a magic ring, huh? And by the time Solomon shows up in the Arabian Nights, hundreds of years later, he's got the magic ring and the flying carpet. The story just keeps growing. So, good to know about. Getting back to the real Solomon, Solomon's love of foreigners was also the cause of his downfall. King Solomon loved many foreign women and clung to them in love. The Bible tells us Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, making a round number of 1,000 women. Solomon's main wife was the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt, and we just don't know that much about her or any of his other wives, the same way we do with David, which is a pity. We know that Solomon built a palace just for her to live in. But according to 2 Chronicles, he built it outside of the city of David, away from the temple and the ark, because, quote, the places to which the ark of the Lord has come are holy. Solomon knew marrying idol worshippers would be a problem, but he did it anyway. His marriage alliances were an area of his life where Solomon didn't trust God. During Solomon's lifetime, Egypt and Syria were engulfed in their own internal turmoils. They were in no shape to make war on their neighbors. God knew what he was doing. He gave Israel a time of peace. But Solomon thought he had to be responsible for making world peace happen. Hence, his marriage alliances. They weren't necessary. God was taking care of him. Sometimes in areas where we are strong, we don't bother to pray or trust God. We think, I've got this. I know what I'm doing. I can handle it. This is the idea behind Jesus' teaching that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. In areas of our life where we are rich, we get arrogant. We get self-reliant. We forget about God. Solomon knew he was breaking the law of Moses by marrying foreign women. He must have thought, I can handle this. I know what I'm doing. I know who the one true God is. I'm not going to forget. But he was under tremendous pressure from his family to accommodate their worship. And little by little, idolatry crept into his family, into his own life, and into all Israel. Knowing what is right doesn't always equal doing what is right. Can I get an amen on that? Is there an area of our lives where we know what is right, but we're just not doing it? Think about it for a moment. Then let's ask ourselves, why aren't we doing what is right? What can we do to change that?